Okay. Hey, thank you for joining everyone. I thought we probably should send out reminders before our calls now that we're doing them on a different day of the week. Kind of throws everything off. But I I'm really excited for this call. We are talking about recomp or fat loss, specifically choosing which one, how to know how to choose each one. I did a little bit of education on this on my social media last week because I think it's really easy to mix up what your goal should be. You could even add in just strictly building muscle into that equation. I think women confuse, like, do I need to focus on building muscle? Do I need to focus on recomping? Do I need to focus on losing body fat? I think it's really easy to mix that up. And a lot of women, most women, I think, in their 30s to 50s, usually think they need fat loss when that isn't always the case. Like, but that's almost always what women say they need. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about like how to decide what is best for you and then how to pursue that option. Specifically talking about body fat or weight loss only and recomping. So the Coach's Corner email, we dove into this a little bit, fat loss versus recomp, which path is right for you. And talking a little bit about the difference between the two. So recomp would mean building muscle and losing body fat simultaneously. And in that scenario, the scale might stay the same. Your shape, strength, and definition will change. And then this is a good option if you want to look more toned and don't mind slower progress to get there. It's going to likely just take a longer for you to kind of like see and feel that progress when you're recomping. You're slowly putting on muscle, you're slowly losing body fat. I should say more slowly than if you were just focused solely on building muscle or solely on losing weight. So it might look a little bit slower, but I personally think focusing on recomping for as long as you possibly can is always going to be the best option because you're going to be probably for most people, well, we'll get a little bit more into what that will look like, but it's just going to be the most sustainable option where pushing a calorie deficit and just really pushing weight loss more aggressively is going to be more challenging for most of us. It's going to require a lot more sacrifice in many ways and also might not even be like what you truly need. So weight, and this says fat loss, but even like more specifically, just weight loss. Like we are pushing a calorie deficit. Hopefully that is all coming from body fat, but that's gonna sort of depend on your programming and the macronutrient distribution of your calorie intake. But reducing body fat in a calorie deficit, the scale is going to go down in this scenario and we want to protect muscle, but the focus is on losing body fat. So we ideally are maintaining muscle during this process. But the further we get into a calorie deficit, the more likely we are to also be losing lean tissue. So we'll talk about kind of ways to mitigate that as much as possible as well. This is really good. This is a good option if you already have a good amount of muscle and just want everything to look tighter. If you want to just lose body fat, but you know, like building more muscle isn't really a huge concern for you. Neither of these options are better, although I will say the former one, recomping, is going to be a little bit easier for most people. The key is just choosing what's right for you, where you are at right now. So, how to approach body recomp if this is your goal. And I will say with the caveat here, if you are the best population to approach recomp as a goal would be someone that's new to lifting because if you are on an effective training program and if you're not a trained lifter, if you aren't like a what would be the word, if you're not a novice lifter, if you haven't been lifting if you have been lifting for a very long time, it's going to be harder to put on muscle on the lower end of maintenance. But it is possible. I've done it and I've been lifting for 20 years, easily. So it's going to really come down to your programming and your macronutrient distribution. But if you're new to lifting, then this is like recomping is very, very easy for you to do. So I would always recommend starting here and then adjusting to maybe more of a calorie deficit if you want to push more fat loss, or maybe the upper end of maintenance if you want to push more building muscle. So starting at maintenance or in a small calorie deficit, I think this decision is going to come down to if you want to kind of push the lever a little bit more on fat loss, or like really make sure you're building muscle. And I think that's going to, if you know, you probably have some idea, like genetics wise, like, gosh, I have a really hard time putting on muscle or have a harder time losing body fat. I would say if you have a harder time losing body fat and putting on muscle is a little bit easier for you, then you could probably push this deficit a little bit more. If it's harder for you to put on muscle, then I would say being at maintenance or the low end of maintenance. I wouldn't go below that. Too low is going to be, it's just going to be solely fat loss for the most part, probably less likely to grow muscle. Too high, we might be putting on muscle and not losing body fat simultaneously, but more maintaining or putting on fat if we're moving up to the high end of maintenance or a surplus. So that's kind of where we want our calorie intake to be. So if my maintenance range, let's say, was, let's just say 2,000 to 2,200, and I wanted to recomp, I have no problem putting on muscle. I can do that in a calorie deficit and have. So I would probably be like in that 1,900 to 2,100 or 1,950 to 2,050 range. If I had a harder time putting on muscle, I would probably be on that upper end of maintenance, just actually probably right in the middle if I still wanted to recomp. So if I was about 2,000 to 2,200, 2,300 for my maintenance range, I'd probably be right around that 2,100 to start with recomp. And this is just your starting point. You're going to adjust this based on how your body is responding. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So protein intake, 1 gram per pound of body weight. I would say you could go a little below, a little above this. So same thing with calories. If you have an easy time putting on muscle, you could even be like 0.75 to 1 or 0.85, I would say 0.85 to 1 gram per pound of body weight for your grams of protein that you're eating daily. So just take your body weight. Let's say if you weigh 150 pounds, it would be 150 grams of protein, or somewhere in that like above 130. Or if you have, so 130 to 150, if you have an easier time putting on muscle. If you have a harder time putting on muscle, then you could even go up to 1.25. So somewhere between 150 and like 170 grams of protein. That would be for a 150-pound person. So playing in there. So that would come down to how hard or easy you have of a time you have putting on muscle, but also that will come down to like how possible it is for you to eat protein. Maybe you have a hard time putting on muscle and eating protein is freaking hard. So anything over 125 would be your goal, right? So I would just like, what is optimal would be goal 1, and then like what's realistic would be goal 2. So I'm just talking like here's optimal, but like all things, this is not all or nothing. So keep that in mind. And just getting adequate protein. I would say like for me, if I weigh 150 pounds, my goal is 150, but I'm going to be happy with anything over 130 grams. Like that's a great day for me. If I have just a terrible day and I hit 100 grams of protein, it's fine. We're moving on the next day and we're going to just tweak the plan, right? So protein intake though is going to be really important in recomp because that's like it's very hard to build muscle if we don't get adequate protein. So that one is important. And then training. Your training is going to be everything. It's really hard to lose body fat and put on muscle if we're just running every day, right? Or if we're not getting any rest to recover and grow. So getting in 3 to 5, I would say the sweet spot for most women is 3 to 4 strength sessions per week with progressive overload, meaning you're tracking your weight, you're tracking your reps, you're tracking your intensity, like how challenging the workout is for you, and you're shooting to increase every week, slightly on those numbers. And that's how you know you're progressively overloading. You don't know if you are progressively overloading if you're just jumping from like one program to the next, right? You're on a consistent program, you're doing the same things weekly, and you're getting better at them for 3 to 6 months at a time, is what I would recommend if you really want to prioritize building muscle. You're getting adequate recovery, 7 to 9 hours of sleep. I would say too, the lower you are into like on the low end of maintenance and the harder you're training, the more sleep you're going to need on that range. Um, you probably, yeah, I would say shoot for the upper end of that range. If you feel like building muscle comes really easy to you and you are recovering really well and you feel amazing, you could probably get away with the lower end of that 7 to 9 hours. But really pay attention to how you feel. If you're dragging through the day, like you don't need more caffeine, you need more sleep. So even an extra 30 minutes consistently can make such a big difference. And I'm speaking to myself here because that's something I've had like a huge light bulb moment with this fall. I feel like the last 10 years I've been like 7 to 9 hours, everyone, 7 to 9 hours. And I think if I'm getting seven, I'm doing a great job. But as I've shifted to 8 hours of sleep, let me tell you, I am a new woman and I have an hour less time in my day, which I hate, but I feel so much better. So consider that if you're dragging and not recovering, like an extra even 30 minutes can go a long way. Timeline. Okay. Slow, steady shape change. So this is where we have to be like very patient. Because we're not going to see we're in just like a huge calorie deficit. We're just seeing the scale go down consistently and getting that validation. You're not going to get that in recomp. What you're going to be paying attention to in recomp is measurements. So I would take weekly measurements, like pick one day of the week that you're going to get your sewing kit measuring tape out, do a waist measurement, do a glute measurement. Those are like the two minimum ones because I feel like if you're getting a waist measurement, you're pretty easily seeing like body fat change. If waist is maintaining or going down, we know we're probably maintaining body fat or we're losing body fat. If I love to do glutes, most women in our programs are working on building their glutes or legs. So if you take a glute measurement and you're seeing that you're maintaining on your glutes, probably maintaining, or you're recomping, right? You're putting on muscle and you're losing body fat. So that measurement is kind of staying the same and you're seeing more. What's really common is we'll see glutes maintaining and waist coming down. That's a pretty good indication of recomp. If you're training lower body, right? If you're training hard, you could also do a thigh measurement as well, and then an arm measurement as well, just to get more information. The more data that you have, the less you're relying on just like feelings, right? Which is always better. But sometimes life is busy. I get that. So at least getting a waist and a hip measurement is going to help. You start to see what's happening. And I would take like don't round up to the nearest inch, right? Do it in centimeters if needed, because those changes week to week are going to be small. But over a month, 1 month at a time, they're going to add up a lot. Looking at photos, another really great one would be like putting on a pair of jeans, seeing how they fit right now, and then putting them on once a week and seeing how they fit and just kind of assessing like, oh, I'm filling out the legs and glutes a little bit more, but like the waist is getting looser. I am noticing a recomp happening. Another way to assess progress is you're feeling leaner, but your strength numbers are increasing, right? So having those two both happening is a really good indication of recomp. Would you guys add anything on recomping? Kind of anything to pay attention to note progress?
I think for, and I tell me if you guys agree, but I believe that it's better to measure like the smallest part of your waist instead
Yeah.
of measuring belly button. Because
Yes.
yeah, what I usually see is that when we are losing, we're losing from top down. So, and then you can also be more removed from bloating and stuff like that. So that's something I always recommend my clients.
Yeah, that's great because I think that's something that's like obvious to us, but not to everyone. So
Yeah,
smallest, I always do the smallest part of my waist and the largest part of my glutes
yeah,
together
exactly.
because that's like easy because you might measure your glutes and be like, oh, is that it? And then you move it around a little bit and you're like, oh no, that's the biggest part of my glutes. Okay. And then smallest part of waist, that's just like a little bit easier to find consistently too.
Yeah, I
Uh,
feel like the it will just like kind of fall into place, the measuring band, if you do like the smallest. And
yeah.
then use the mirror for looking for what's the biggest.
Yeah, true. And then common mistakes to avoid when trying to recomp. So lifting too light or with like not enough intensity, not pushing your reps near failure. And also just not tracking progress, like not knowing where you're at. Did you lift less last week or more? That's really easy to do when you're distracted when lifting, right? Which can happen to all of us. We have a lot on our plates. I've got group me's coming in for like kids' sports. I've got random emails coming in. It's really easy to get distracted on my phone when I'm lifting. So sometimes even just like writing it down and setting your phone to the side so that you can just track your numbers is really helpful too. Over relying on cardio or crazy high step counts. This is one that is easy, I think, to miss when recomping is a lot of us it can have very active lives. Like maybe we're walking kids to and from school, maybe we're walking to and from sports. Like we all have really different lives, right? So it's hard to know if like your step count is the same as someone else's step count. And I think like getting too much cardio and high step counts can take away from recovery 1000%. So paying attention to that and not overdoing it. I would say if you're over 15,000 steps a day and you're feeling under recovered, like that's maybe an area, like maybe you don't need to walk during your meetings. Maybe you can just sit and recover. Not to say that 15,000 steps is like too much for everyone. This is going to be individual, right? So that's something to pay attention to. Or if you're doing cardio 3 or more times per week, that's going to be a lot on top of 3 to 4 lifting sessions. And that might be getting in the way of you being able to push your lifts so that you're building muscle. That also might get in the way and make it hard to be on the low end of maintenance if hunger is really high. So just things to consider that are kind of common areas that I see women making mistakes in. Eating too little to fuel muscle growth. So, like paying attention to where your calorie intake it should be and getting adequate protein. And then also if we're skipping recovery or rest, that's another one. We talked a little bit about how to measure progress. So, picking 3 to 4 of these metrics and sticking with them for 6 to 8 weeks or more. Really, if you're recomping, like you could do this for 3 to 6 months before you really, it's more like subtle tweaks. You might notice, okay, I've kind of hit a plateau. Okay, I really want to bring maybe focus a little bit more on body fat, and let's bring calorie intake down slightly. Maybe bring steps up a little, like not a crazy amount. Like maybe we're coming up 1,500 steps or we're bringing intake down 100 to 150 calories, and then continue to track these same metrics and reevaluate. So if you feel like I'm already well muscled, I feel really good. I want to just lose body fat and maintain my lean tissue or maybe lose a little bit. I'm okay with that too. Like I really want to fat loss to be the priority here. Then I would create a moderate calorie deficit. About 10 to 15% is a good place for most people to begin. You'll probably end up going at a higher percentage as you plateau, but I think not starting too high is important. zero point 0.8 to 1 gram, same thing on protein intake. You could even push higher too if you feel like you're at more likely to lose muscle or training isn't as optimal, just to really make sure you can protect your lean tissue as much as possible. And then training is the same. So a lot of these things are really the same, except for with fat loss, we're going to be in an actual calorie deficit, more of a deficit. And we are going to probably use a little bit more cardio as a tool. It kind of just depends. Zone 2 would be the one that we're mostly titrating based on how we're feeling and how we're progressing. So I like to utilize a calorie deficit through less food, but also maybe adding in zone 2 that's not going to be as stressful or as much of like a hunger spike for me. If I'm doing more high intensity zones 3, 4, 5, I just get hungrier throughout the day. So zone 2 I feel like is not as stressful in my body and I can kind of sustain that and still be in a calorie deficit. So finding that right combination of zone 2 cardio and a calorie deficit. I think starting at about 15% of a calorie deficit and getting in maybe 40 minutes of zone two a week is like a great place for most people to start. And then adjusting from there. If you're feeling tired and you have hit a plateau, like maybe pull more from food. If you're feeling hungry and you've hit a plateau, maybe pull more from cardio or add more steps throughout the day. If you can optimize on steps as well, that's going to be even lower intensity and lower stress than zone two. So, sort of pulling from those three options to elicit more of a calorie deficit for yourself. And then timeline for progress would be about half to 1% body weight loss per week. Slower is going to be better for muscle retention and also just sustainability. So for most women, that's going to be a half pound to 1.5 pounds per week, but that is, I would say most of our clientele that we work with, we're looking at a half pound to a pound per week as being optimal. And once you get closer to that 1.5 pounds or even 2 pounds, like we're really risking losing lean tissue. So those are that's slow and steady, right? And that's not you're not going to see that daily on the scale. Like we're looking at your 7 days of the week and averaging out your scale readings and seeing a 0.5 to a 1% loss this week's weekly average
Did.
last week. So that's going to be, you're going to be looking at a lot of data points to assess progress there. And also for those of us that are having a regular menstrual cycle or irregular menstrual cycle in perimenopause, right? We're going to be retaining water differently. So that's going to impact our scale reading. So that's why we really want to do the waist and hip measurement as well. Um, and then also take photos, see how clothes are fitting, because the scale isn't always going to give you validation depending on where you're at in your cycle, or travel, or going out to eat, or stress, or training. There's so many factors that can affect the scale. So taking measurements will be important as well. But that's kind of what you can kind of sort of plan on seeing on the scale. So really common mistakes to avoid when trying to lose fat that we see often. I would say number one would be slashing calories aggressively. I I feel like so many people do this. And yeah, like the faster we can lose the body fat, the less we're in the calorie deficit, right? And we just buckle down and do it. But the problem is we aren't living in a bubble. We have busy lives and people that depend on us and stressors. And so just eating 1,200 calories a day is going to be really unrealistic for most of us, right? So just putting yourself in a moderate calorie deficit and knowing that is like it took a while to put on body fat, it's gonna take a while to lose it. And just be willing to get excited about the process and your systems that you're implementing because that's going to make it so much easier to then keep the weight off when you're done. And it's not an overhaul of your diet. It doesn't need to be a huge overhaul. It's just small tweaks. I actually have a sibling that is trying to lose body fat right now. And they came to me first telling me about their super low calorie plan. And as a nutrition coach, but also a family member, I know better than to give unsolicited advice. And so I just like, okay, well, here's some things that, maybe worth considering. And then they came to me another month later with another plan of eliminating all these food groups and kind of same thing. And now fast forward, they're about a week and a half into tracking their food intake in a calorie deficit, not eliminating any foods at a moderate deficit, and are so amazed at how much easier it is. They're feeling so much more satisfied. The scale is coming down. They aren't eliminating food groups. They're learning so much about the foods that they're eating. And so it's amazing what logging your food can do for you in terms of flexibility and also just education. Like it's so cool to pre-log your day and see like, oh, I can make these like subtle tweaks and my meal could go from 600 calories down to 300 calories and I'm actually more satisfied because I have more volume in my meal. So making small changes is the best way to learn and to have it be enjoyable along the process. So not slashing calories really aggressively. For one, it's really hard to maintain, but also it can impact our hormones and that can impact our metabolism as well as just our energy, which is just going to make us want to move less. It's going to make the whole process a lot harder. Relying on only cardio is not ideal because that's going to make it to where we're now way more likely to lose muscle tissue, which we don't want. Missing strength training, the further you get into a calorie deficit, your intensity is just going to go down, and you might need to make some adjustments with your strength training, but keeping that programming there and doing your best with it is always going to be optimal and important. And then obsessing, this is another one, over daily scale swings instead of weekly averages. We never get emotional about one or two scale readings. It's just data and could be helpful data, like knowing like, oh, maybe I didn't sleep as well last night, or I had a lot more carbohydrates than I normally do last night, or I traveled, or I'm probably retaining some water right now. Like it's just information, nothing to stress out about. Look at your weekly averages. And then how to measure fat loss progress. I talked about this a little bit. Similar to Recomp, but the scale is going to be obviously a part of that as well. And our fat loss cohort, we are going to be giving education on both Recomp and fat loss. So for those of you that are considering joining the cohort, we would love to have you. We still have signups open, and we start prep week is the week of the 15th. I also wanted to just share a photo example here before we end of what Recomp looks like. So this is me mostly running, and then this is me training for my bodybuilding show a couple years ago, doing a combination of cardio and weight training. And I guess actually in this first photo, I was just starting CrossFit too. So coming off of college track, and I weigh probably within just like a couple pounds um, on both of these photos. So if I had just like only wanted to see the scale go down, I would have missed out on. And then this is obviously very, very lean. Here I have a lot more muscle tissue in the second photo. This is leaner than I like to sit, but I think it's a good representation of the scale being about the same and looking very, very different in both photos. And I think that's important to remember with Recomp. And even if you are gaining a couple of pounds and putting more muscle on than you had before, like not necessarily something to ever be afraid of, because our bodies can change so much with the foods that we are just what our food intake looks like and what our weight training looks like. And over time, that can have a huge impact. So, for those of you that feel like you're not seeing any progress because the scale's not moving, I challenge you to reconsider that and keep doing what you're doing. If you are weight training regularly and pushing a high effort and you're focused on getting in enough protein and having your calorie intake be optimal for you in Recomp, I urge you to trust the process and not feel like you need to jump around from program to program because you're not seeing progress. Take measurements, take photos, try on your clothes, look at your workouts, and also consider all of your biofeedback. Like, how do you feel throughout the day? How's energy? How's recovery? How's sleep? How's your confidence? What does it feel like to lift heavy and to show up for yourself and make meals that nourish your body? That all is going to add up over time. So, whether or not you're choosing fat loss or recomp, some different things to consider, but they really can look very similar in a lot of ways, other than mostly calorie deficit, calorie intake, and then maybe cardio and steps being like some major factors there. So, anything else to add, team, or any questions from anyone before we go today?
I think that you have said it all. I think it was a great information.
Yeah, well, hopefully that helps. If you're kind of back and forth on what to do, and if you guys have any more specific questions on either of those, or if you're in one right now and feeling discouraged and want to just talk about anything, or ask questions on anything, then let us know. And I hope everyone has a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining.